I guess I'm a witch.
We had to put up a nice little title there. So, Kenya almost became a witch. Is that true? Like,
It is true, actually.
it's true.
Yeah.
Please tell us.
Will do. Will do. So, basically, my full testimony is on my channel.
Yeah, and it's a great testimony for those who haven't seen it.
Yeah. So basically, I got lumped into this whole using crystals, healing crystals. I guess kind of gateway thing. So I started out using crystals because I wanted, power. I wanted to take back control of my life. And based off the podcasts I was listening to and things like that, everyone was like, yeah, you got to use these. So I was like, okay. So I got some, and something I know that, and I also got sage and like Palo Santo and stuff like that.
So you're deep into it?
I was definitely getting in there. So I got all that stuff. I wanted to get rid of all the negative energy out of my dorm room. I was like, no, I'm not having it. Peace and happiness is what I wanted. So I delved in that a little bit. I got to a point where I was like, okay, let me try things. Let me try to see auras. Let me try. I was even getting to the point where I was like, okay, I want to try some spells and things like that. And as I was thinking, I was like, does God approve of this? And so I started researching, started looking up stuff about it. And people were like, I mean, if God made it, then it's good for you to use. It's totally fine.
So you were still trying to be like a Christian. So you weren't intentionally trying to be, get yourself all the way in and be like, I'm a witch and that's it. And I detest the Bible and Christianity.
No.
Okay. So that's super interesting because that kind of gets into my first thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which is why do people get into witchcraft?
I think a big reason why is because of power, because something happened to them. A majority of people who are involved in witchcraft are women, of course.
Right.
So I think something usually traumatic happened and they want to have that power back, or like they get in a breakup and they're like, okay, self-love, woman empowerment, all that kind of stuff. So I think it all goes back to power and control.
That's interesting. So you say a lot of female, so there's a big, push for like feminism and women empowerment. So do you think that's kind of, push people also along with that is, a lot of men stepping away from, religion in general, especially from churches. So do you think that's kind of, this area where, it used to be women would, in a godly Christian relationship, they would follow their man who was led by God, and that would be the core of the nuclear family. But now it's like people aren't even getting married as much, or if they are, or they're getting together, then your man's not religious, and the female's like, well, what do I do? Like, where are we going? What's the lead?
Want some kind of spirituality.
Yeah. And then along with this push for, feminism, now they're like, oh, let me just delve into this, because along with, the power to vote and the power to do this and be sexually liberated, now I got the power to control my own life and get that promotion I wanted because I, did whatever. I'm not sure. So, I mean, it's super interesting how, all of that has kind of been woven into our culture as we become more secular, and, separated ourselves more from God as just, a society. Yeah. And so my next thing was, how do people get into witchcraft, and what was like your experience going down that path? So you touched on it a little bit, but how do people, did you have friends that were into it?
No, I didn't actually. So what happened was, so at that time, I just went through a breakup and I was really just trying to find myself. And so I started up this business, and as I was starting up a business, I started looking into, like, you know, of course, business, women talking about business.
Right.
And a common factor that I noticed was a lot of women would be into the healing crystals and be into all these witchcraft kind of things. And so I was like, well, she's successful doing what I want to do, having a successful business. And maybe this is the road to get there.
Right.
So I started exploring more, digging more, and that's kind of how I came to this whole witchcraft thing.
Wow. And so, how do you think? So, do you think your experience is similar to other females, or do you think there's a lot of females who are just like, I don't know what to do. Let me just try this because a lot of other females are trying. Or what do you think? Because you kind of had a ground in Christianity, but now there's a lot of women out there or young girls who, like I said, the world's becoming more secular. So they've gone to church, but they weren't really raised in church. They know some of the Bible, but they never really went to like a hardcore, Bible believing church, or their parents weren't, strict about ingraining them in biblical principles. So how do you think they just kind of run into this stuff?
It could be a plethora of things. It could be TikTok. TikTok could be a very big thing, especially if you look up, hashtags about empowerment or whatever the case may be.
Right.
There is everywhere. I think a lot of like books, like a lot of self-help books mention things like that. Like a book called You Are a Bad A mentions things about like source energy and universe and things like that. And I think like those are like little, keywords. And then you look up the keyword somewhere and you're like, oh, okay. And you just find yourself in a deeper hole. I think that's what happened.
Yeah, and just going back to your point, because I used to read a lot of self-help books and everything, and then you realize most of this is just coming from the Bible, but then it's also mixing like these new age ideologies.
Yeah.
And then when I started, really diving into the Word and really being disciplined in, God's will and His commandments and what He has as far as the plan for a Christian's life, I was like, a lot of this stuff is, kind of mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
And like when we first met, and I think you said like, what do you think like God is? And one of the things I said was like the source, and you're like, don't say that. It's like source energy. And I think He is. I think He's the source of source.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show you that just the language that they use, especially when you've turned away from that, it's kind of like, oh, I don't even want to hear that terminology or definition and stuff like that.
Yeah, and to touch on that, I think it goes back to, like the devil is like the greatest deceiver.
Right.
And one of the ways he deceives is like to pretend to be the light. So like what you said about like source energy, like God is the source.
Right.
But then when it's taken out of context, it sounds like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be, when it really isn't.
Right. And I mean, just going back to what you said, like they pretend, like the devil can pretend to be the light. And sometimes like we're supposed to be beacons of God's light, right? And sometimes like a trick of the enemy will be that he wants to kind of imitate that and act like he's like reflectant of that. And so when you accomplish something, you think it's by your own doing, but really it was God, orchestrating that the whole time.
The Holy Spirit.
Yeah, but all you see is, the end result, and you think it's you just because of the ideologies that you've been feeding yourself. But if you just get grounded in the Word, then you realize now that everything goes back to God. All right, so here's the big question. Is there such thing as a good witch?
I guess it depends on your definition of good. Now,
my definition. Good. That's not how I thought you were going to answer that.
Yeah, it just came to me.
Expound.
Okay, well, my definition of good is God. God is the ultimate goodness. Therefore, No, witchcraft is not. You cannot be a good witch based off that definition.
That's some bars. That's some bars for sure.
But but if your definition of good is I'm a good person, you know,
Right.
or
But when people say that, it's like you're good based off of what?
yeah, exactly.
It's like, can you tell me what good is? And they're just like, me, I'm a good person. It's like, okay, but based off of like what makes you good? Like, oh, I help this person, I help that person. It's like, does helping people make you good? Because it's like you would consider maybe like the worst person you can think of, a murderer. They could have helped somebody. They probably had people that they highly admired, that they, cared for a lot, but they had this evil within them. Like, what makes them bad and you good? You know what I mean? Oh, I didn't murder anybody. It's like, okay, well, let's measure you up against the standard of God, which is the Ten Commandments. Because if we go down all the Ten Commandments, I promise you, most of us are adulterers at heart because, we've looked at a woman with lust in our eyes or a man with lust in our eyes. I mean, you open up Instagram and, I mean, we probably break that commandment just by opening up the app.
Everybody's eyes are out.
Yeah, it's like something Candace Owens says all the time. It's like there's pornography literally everywhere. Like if you just walk down the street, there's, females that are half dressed because they're, that's just a style of culture. And, there's a lot of men who are just trying to, they call it thirst trapping or whatever, just trying to, wear things super tight to make themselves more sexually appealing. And it's like, well, we need to be more modest.
Yeah.
As Christians,
as a whole,
as believers.
yeah.
But yeah, especially in a society, it would be nice to see the whole of society be more modest and us get back to, more biblical roots. And so here's our conclusion. Our conclusion: as Christians, we should find our identity in Christ, following his example. Jesus did not practice magic or rely on any objects as healing vehicles like crystals and sage and all that good stuff. He relied on the strength found in seeking the Father, or power granted from the Father, even when showcasing miracles. That's how we should conduct ourselves. And I think we are going to sip to that.